I stared at the legal papers in my hands, reading the same line over and over again. My own parents were suing me for $330,000, claiming I had stolen my brother's future and demanding I pay his debts. The lawsuit alleged that I deliberately sabotaged Derek's business opportunities and used insider family knowledge to gain unfair advantages. After building everything from scratch, while Derek received every advantage imaginable, my parents wanted to destroy me legally to save their golden child. The irony was suffocating. 24 years old, debt-free homeowner, successful business owner, and this was my reward. Growing up in suburban Milwaukee, the favoritism was never subtle. My parents, Robert and Susan, both successful accountants with their own firm, made their preferences crystal clear from the time Derek and I could walk. Derek, 2 years older than me, was everything they wanted in a son. Star quarterback in high school, effortlessly charismatic, the kind of kid who could charm teachers into giving him extensions and talk his way out of trouble with a smile. I was the quiet one, the studious one, the one who got good grades without drama or fanfare. My parents saw this as proof that I needed less attention, less support, less investment. Derek was the project that required their full focus and unlimited resources. When Derek graduated high school, the celebration lasted for weeks. My parents threw him a party at the country club, invited 200 people, and presented him with a brand new Ford Mustang, wrapped in a giant red bow. They also announced they were paying for his full college education at the University of Wisconsin, plus a $25,000 startup fund for his senior year business idea, whatever that might be. 2 years later, when I graduated as valedictorian, we went to dinner at Applebee's. My parents paid for community college tuition and told me they were confident I could handle the rest on my own. I was smart enough to figure things out, they said. Derek needed more help because entrepreneurship was risky and required family investment. The warehouse job I took to cover my living expenses started at $6 an hour, loading trucks from 11 at night until 7 in the morning. I would come home, shower, grab a protein bar, and head to classes. My weekends were spent working additional shifts at a local grocery store. Every dollar was accounted for, every expense calculated and reconsidered. Derek's college experience unfolded like a movie about privileged youth. His social media showed constant parties, spring break trips to Cancun, and a lifestyle funded entirely by our parents. His grades were mediocre, his attendance spotty, but Robert and Susan called this normal college behavior. Boys will be boys, they said. He was networking, building relationships, learning life skills outside the classroom. When Derek struggled with his accounting classes, our parents hired him a private tutor. When I struggled to afford textbooks, they suggested I use the library copies or find used ones online. The double standard was so consistent, it became white noise background injustice I learned to ignore while focusing on my own path forward. The startup fund Derek received his senior year went toward a vague business plan involving custom t-shirts for fraternities. He bought expensive equipment, rented warehouse space, hired 3 of his fraternity brothers as employees, and launched what he called a multimedia marketing company. Within 6 months, the money was gone, the equipment sold, and Derek was back to asking our parents for spending money. But graduation brought an even bigger surprise. At the family celebration dinner, Derek announced he was ready to become a real entrepreneur. He had learned valuable lessons from his college business experience. He explained, and now he needed serious capital to launch his professional career. Robert and Susan exchanged meaningful looks across the table. They had been planning for this moment, they announced. They believed in Derek's potential so strongly that they were prepared to make the ultimate investment in his future. The next morning, Derek received a check for $330,000. I found out about this when my mother called to tell me not to expect any help with my community college debt, because all available family resources were committed to Derek's business launch. When I asked if there might be even a small amount available to help me transfer to a 4-year school, Susan explained patiently that Derek needed this opportunity more than I did. I was already proving I could succeed on my own, while Derek required more support to reach his potential. What I discovered later through a family friend who worked at their bank made the betrayal even deeper. My parents had liquidated their retirement savings, taken out a second mortgage on their house, and borrowed against their life insurance policies to assemble Derek's $330,000 gift. They had risked their entire financial security on Derek's dreams, while telling me the money simply was not available. Derek used his windfall to buy a silver BMW lease, a downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, and hire his college friends for a company that existed mainly on business cards and a flashy website. His LinkedIn profile listed him as Chief Executive Officer and founder, though nobody could quite explain what the company actually did. Meanwhile, I graduated with honors from community college, 2 years of business courses, completed with a perfect grade point average, and zero family support. I had saved $8,000 working my warehouse and grocery store jobs, enough to transfer to a state university if I continued working full-time while attending classes. The contrast between Derek's launch party and my graduation ceremony captured everything perfectly. Derek's celebration was held at an exclusive downtown venue with champagne toasts, professional photography, and speeches about his bright entrepreneurial future. My community college graduation was attended by my girlfriend Emma, my supervisor from the warehouse, and nobody else from my family. Robert and Susan were in Chicago that weekend, attending a business conference that suddenly seemed more important than their younger son's academic achievement. But the real shock came when Derek announced his first major business venture. He was starting a financial consultancy company, targeting small businesses that needed help with bookkeeping and tax planning. This was exactly the market I had been studying, the area where I had been developing expertise through my business courses and part-time freelance work. Derek explained to our parents that my modest success with a few local clients proved there was demand in this space. He would simply do it bigger, better, and more professionally. With his capital and their continued support, he could dominate the market that I had discovered. The family meeting where this plan was announced remains burned into my memory. Derek presented his business model like he had invented the concept of helping small businesses with financial planning. Our parents nodded approvingly, praising his insight and vision. When I mentioned that I had been working in this exact field for 2 years, Derek dismissed my experience as small-time amateur work that would naturally be absorbed into his professional operation. Robert asked if I would consider joining Derek's company as an employee. The salary he mentioned was less than I was already earning freelance, with the added insult of working under my brother's supervision in a business based entirely on my own discoveries and relationships. I declined as politely as possible and excused myself from the meeting. Walking to my 15-year-old Honda in their driveway past Derek's BMW and their matching Lexus sedans, I realized something fundamental had shifted. My family was not just indifferent to my success. They were actively working against it. The next 3 years became a masterclass in what determination could accomplish without family money or connections. I transferred to Wisconsin State University, working 60-hour weeks between my warehouse job and an expanding freelance bookkeeping practice. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford, but every sacrifice felt purposeful in a way Derek's funded lifestyle never could. My studio apartment near campus cost $450 a month and featured a kitchen the size of a closet, a bathroom with questionable plumbing, and neighbors who believed music sounded better at maximum volume. I furnished it with items from garage sales and thrift stores, creating a workspace around my kitchen table where I built what would eventually become a 6-figure business. The freelance work started small. Mrs. Henderson, who owned a flower shop 3 blocks from campus, needed help organizing receipts for tax season. She paid me $50 and recommended me to her sister, who owned a small bakery. Word of mouth became my marketing strategy, and genuine care for my clients' success became my competitive advantage. While Derek's social media showcased expensive dinners and business trips to conferences, I was studying tax codes at midnight and learning QuickBooks tutorials on YouTube. Every client represented not just income, but education in real business challenges. I learned about inventory management from a hardware store owner, cash flow planning from a restaurant manager, and customer retention strategies from a small marketing firm. Emma supported my grueling schedule with patience that amazed me. She would bring me coffee during my late-night study sessions and help stuff envelopes when I finally saved enough money to mail professional brochures to potential clients. Her part-time job at a campus bookstore barely covered her own expenses, but she never complained about our cheap dates or my constant exhaustion. Derek's business, meanwhile, seemed to exist primarily in press releases and networking events. His website featured stock photos of diverse business professionals shaking hands in modern offices, but actual client work remained mysteriously vague. His social media posts talked about disrupting traditional financial services and leveraging innovative solutions, but specific results never materialized. When I turned 23, my business had grown to 15 regular clients and was generating steady monthly revenue. I was able to quit the warehouse job and focus entirely on building my consultancy while finishing my degree. For the first time since high school, I was sleeping more than 5 hours a night and eating meals that did not come from vending machines. Derek, by contrast, had burned through most of his $330,000 on overhead costs and lifestyle expenses that far exceeded any income his company generated. But Robert and Susan continued praising his vision and ambition, while treating my actual profit as a cute hobby that would never amount to anything serious. My 24th birthday brought 3 major milestones that defined the trajectory of everything that followed. First, I made my final student loan payment, officially debt-free, for the first time in my adult life. Second, I used money saved from 18 months of profitable business operations to buy a foreclosed house on the east side of Milwaukee, a small 2-bedroom bungalow that needed work but had good bones and unlimited potential. The house cost $43,000 and required another $15,000 in renovations. I did myself over 6 months of weekends. I learned plumbing from YouTube videos, borrowed tools from clients who had become friends, and slowly transformed the property into something both livable and valuable. Emma helped with painting and landscaping, turning the project into quality time rather than additional stress. The third milestone was hitting 6 figures in annual revenue. 28 clients were paying me monthly retainers for ongoing financial planning and tax preparation services. My reputation for honest advice and careful attention to detail had created a referral network that required me to turn away potential clients due to capacity constraints. This success should have been celebrated by my family. Instead, it triggered the beginning of Derek's most destructive phase. The family dinner where I announced my house purchase and business growth was supposed to be a celebration. I had invited Robert and Susan to see the progress on my renovations, hoping finally to receive some acknowledgement that their younger son had accomplished something meaningful without their assistance. Derek arrived at the restaurant 40 minutes late, interrupting my explanation of cash flow projections with an announcement that made my blood freeze. He was launching his own financial consultancy business. He declared, targeting the exact same small business market where I had spent 3 years building relationships and expertise. His company would be called Premium Business Solutions, and it would offer everything my business provided, but with better marketing, professional office space, and a larger team. Derek explained to our parents that my success proved demand existed in this market. He would simply execute the same strategy with more resources and superior business acumen. Robert immediately offered additional funding to support Derek's venture. Susan praised his initiative in identifying an underserved market opportunity. When I pointed out that I had been serving this market successfully for 3 years, Derek dismissed my work as small-scale validation of his larger vision. The meal continued for another hour, but I heard nothing after Derek's announcement. My entire business model, client relationships, and market positioning were being copied by someone with unlimited family funding and zero relevant experience. Worse, my parents were enthusiastically supporting this theft, while treating my reaction as petty jealousy. Driving home to my partially renovated house, Emma sitting quietly in the passenger seat, I realized this was no longer about family favoritism or unfair resource allocation. This was war. Derek was not just receiving advantages I was denied. He was actively trying to destroy what I had built through my own efforts. But Derek had made one crucial miscalculation. He assumed that business success could be purchased with family money and copied from someone else's experience. What he did not understand was that my clients hired me because they trusted my judgment, valued my personal attention, and appreciated my genuine investment in their success. These relationships could not be replicated with flashy marketing or premium office space. The night Derek announced his competing business, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote out a comprehensive business plan for the next 2 years. If my brother wanted to compete in my market, I would show him what real entrepreneurship looked like. I would expand my services, deepen my client relationships, and build something so solid that his well-funded imitation would collapse under its own superficiality. I had spent 4 years learning that I could accomplish anything without family support. Now I would discover what I could achieve when that same family was actively working against me. Derek's launch of Premium Business Solutions was everything I expected, and worse. He leased the top floor of a downtown office building, complete with glass conference rooms, leather furniture, and a reception area that looked like a luxury hotel lobby. His staff of 6 included 3 of his college friends, a receptionist who had never worked in business services, and 2 recent graduates with finance degrees, but 0 practical experience. The marketing campaign was relentless and expensive. Full-page ads in the Milwaukee Business Journal, sponsored posts on LinkedIn, and a website that featured professional photography and testimonials from companies I had never heard of. Derek positioned himself as a visionary entrepreneur who understood the future of business consulting, while traditional providers remained stuck in outdated approaches. But the most painful part was watching him target my existing clients with aggressive sales tactics that bordered on harassment. Derek would call my clients directly claiming that my services were adequate for small-scale operations, but that growing businesses needed premium solutions. He offered lower rates, initially promising more sophisticated analysis and strategic planning than they could receive from a one-person operation. Several clients called to tell me about Derek's sales pitches, which invariably included subtle criticisms of my qualifications and methods. Derek would mention that he had access to advanced software and financial modeling tools that I could not afford. He suggested that business owners who wanted to be taken seriously needed consultants who looked and acted the part of success. The family pressure campaign intensified as Derek's business expenses mounted without corresponding revenue. Sunday dinners became strategy sessions where Robert and Susan would suggest ways I could help my brother succeed. Perhaps I could refer clients who were too small for my growing practice. Maybe I could share insights about pricing strategies or client acquisition approaches. When I refused to participate in supporting Derek's copycat business, the conversations turned ugly. Susan accused me of jealousy and selfishness, suggesting that successful families helped each other rather than competing. Robert questioned whether my individualistic approach was sustainable in the long term, implying that I would eventually need family connections to grow beyond my current limitations. Derek became increasingly desperate as his overhead costs consumed cash faster than he could generate income. His staff was expensive, his office lease was astronomical, and his marketing expenses were draining resources without producing qualified leads. The clients he managed to acquire were often dissatisfied with the actual services provided, which fell far short of the premium promises made during his sales presentations. Meanwhile, my business was experiencing unexpected growth. The contrast between Derek's aggressive sales tactics and my relationship-based approach actually helped potential clients understand the difference between authentic expertise and flashy marketing. Several business owners who had considered switching to Premium Business Solutions decided to stay with me after experiencing Derek's high-pressure sales process. I also began receiving referrals from clients who had friends or colleagues approached by Derek's team. Word spread through the small business community that the flashy new consultancy was more focused on selling services than delivering results, while the quiet guy with the home office consistently provided valuable guidance at reasonable prices. But Derek's most destructive decision was claiming credit for my success in ways that threatened my professional reputation. During networking events and sales meetings, Derek would casually mention that he and his brother had developed their business expertise together through family discussions and shared research. He implied that my consulting practice had benefited from his insights and guidance. Several potential clients asked me about my relationship with Premium Business Solutions, having heard Derek suggest that our businesses were connected or collaborative. I had to carefully explain that we were completely separate operations with different approaches and methodologies without directly criticizing my brother in professional settings. The situation reached a crisis point when Derek's business model collapsed entirely. After 18 months of operation, Premium Business Solutions had generated less than $60,000 in revenue, while spending more than $200,000 on salaries, rent, marketing, and equipment. Derek's attempts to blame external factors, difficult clients, and market conditions could not hide the fundamental problem that his business provided no real value to customers. The bankruptcy filing was swift and brutal. Derek's creditors moved to seize assets his employees filed for unemployment, and several clients threatened lawsuits over unfinished projects and poor advice that had cost them money. The local business community watched the collapse with a mixture of sympathy and inevitability, having witnessed Derek's inexperience and arrogance throughout his brief entrepreneurial career. But the personal consequences were even more devastating. Robert and Susan had co-signed for Derek's business loans and credit lines, believing their son's confident projections about future profitability. When Premium Business Solutions declared bankruptcy, my parents became personally liable for more than $150,000 in additional debt, beyond the original $330,000 gift. Facing potential foreclosure on their home retirement savings, completely depleted, and their professional reputations damaged by association with Derek's failed venture, my parents entered the most desperate phase of their financial lives. And instead of acknowledging the poor judgment that had created this crisis, they began looking for someone else to blame. The discovery that changed everything came during Derek's bankruptcy proceedings, when court documents revealed how he had been misrepresenting his business relationships to creditors and clients. Derek had been telling people that Premium Business Solutions was affiliated with my consultancy, suggesting that his business failures were somehow connected to my success. Multiple creditors contacted me directly, believing that Derek's debts were partly my responsibility, due to our supposed business partnership. Some of Derek's former clients threatened to file complaints against my business, having been told that I was involved in the poor service they had received from Premium Business Solutions. The realization hit me like physical pain. Derek had not just failed in his attempt to copy my business. He had actively sabotaged my reputation by claiming false connections and shared responsibility. My brother was destroying my legitimate success to deflect blame for his spectacular failure. Standing in my home office, reading legal documents that threatened everything I had built through years of careful work and honest dealing, I understood that this situation was far beyond family conflict or business competition. Derek was willing to destroy my life to avoid taking responsibility for his own choices. And my parents were about to help him do it. The legal papers arrived on a Tuesday morning at 9:30, delivered to my office by a process server who asked me to confirm my identity before handing me the manila envelope that would change my life. My assistant Jenny watched nervously as I opened the documents, probably expecting some routine business correspondence, rather than a declaration of war from my own family. The lawsuit was 47 pages of accusations that read like fiction. My parents and Derek were suing me for $330,000 in damages, plus interest, legal fees, and punitive damages that could double the total amount. The central claim was tortious interference with business relationships, alleging that I had deliberately sabotaged Derek's company by stealing clients, undercutting prices, and using insider family knowledge to gain unfair competitive advantages. But the specific accusations were even more shocking than the dollar amount. The lawsuit claimed that I had learned about the small business consulting market through conversations with Derek during family gatherings, essentially stealing his business model and implementing it before he could launch his own company. It alleged that my pricing strategies were designed specifically to undermine Derek's profitability, and that I had spread false information about his qualifications to potential clients. Perhaps most damaging was the claim that I had used confidential information about Derek's business plans, obtained through family relationships, to position my services as alternatives to what premium business solutions would offer. The lawsuit painted a picture of calculated sibling rivalry that had escalated into business sabotage, with me as the jealous younger brother willing to destroy family relationships for personal gain. Jenny's eyes widened as she read over my shoulder. Within hours, word had spread through our small business community that I was being sued by my own family for allegedly stealing my brother's business ideas and sabotaging his company. The local news picked up the story by afternoon, framing it as a cautionary tale about family businesses gone wrong and the dangers of mixing personal relationships with professional competition. The media attention was devastating. Derek gave interviews portraying himself as an idealistic entrepreneur whose innovative business model had been stolen and perverted by a jealous family member. He spoke tearfully about the destruction of family relationships and the betrayal of trust that had led to this legal action. My parents appeared on the local evening news, explaining sadly that they had no choice but to seek legal remedies when family intervention had failed to resolve the situation. Several of my clients called within the first week, asking uncomfortable questions about the allegations and whether my business practices were as ethical as they had believed. 2 potential clients canceled meetings, explaining that they wanted to wait until the legal situation was resolved before making decisions about financial consulting services. The cloud of suspicion created by the lawsuit was accomplishing exactly what Derek had failed to achieve through direct competition. My first instinct was to settle quickly and quietly, paying whatever amount would make the lawsuit disappear before it completely destroyed my reputation and client relationships. The legal fees alone would be enormous, and a protracted court battle would provide months of negative publicity that could permanently damage my business. But when I met with attorney Sarah Martinez, a specialist in business litigation, who had been recommended by one of my clients, she immediately identified serious problems with my family's legal strategy. The timeline of my business development, documented through tax returns, client contracts, and marketing materials, clearly predated any legitimate business activities by Derek. My business model was based on established industry practices, not innovative approaches that could be considered proprietary intellectual property. More importantly, Sarah discovered that Derek and my parents had made crucial mistakes in their legal filings. Several of their claims could be easily disproven through public records and documented evidence. Their allegation that I had used insider family information was particularly weak, since my business expertise had been developed through formal education, professional experience, and independent research rather than family conversations. But the most shocking discovery came when Sarah began investigating the coordination behind the lawsuit. Through preliminary document requests, we learned that Derek had been planning legal action against me for more than 6 months long, before his business had actually failed. Text messages and emails showed him discussing strategy with my parents and exploring ways to claim that my success was somehow derived from his ideas or resources. Even more disturbing was the revelation that Derek had been working with several of his former business associates to file coordinated lawsuits against me. 3 of the investors who had provided additional funding to Premium Business Solutions were preparing separate legal actions, claiming that my business practices had contributed to Derek's failure and their financial losses. The conspiracy was broader and more calculated than I had imagined. Derek was not just trying to recover from his business failure through litigation. He was attempting to seize my entire business and personal assets by claiming that everything I had built actually belonged to him through family relationships and shared development. The psychological pressure was intense. Emma faced harassment from extended family members who accused her of encouraging my selfishness and family betrayal. My parents showed up at my house demanding that I stop destroying the family through expensive legal fighting and accept responsibility for Derek's situation. Anonymous negative reviews appeared on my business social media accounts, clearly written by people who knew nothing about my actual services, but wanted to damage my reputation. Derek began following me around town, taking photographs and documenting my activities, as if gathering evidence for some larger case. He would appear at restaurants where Emma and I were having dinner, sitting across the room and staring at us throughout the meal. His car would be parked outside my office building when I arrived for work, and still be there when I left in the evening. The community that had supported my business growth was being systematically poisoned against me through a campaign of whispers and implications. Derek's narrative about stolen opportunities and family betrayal was simple and emotionally compelling, while the truth about my independent success required detailed explanations that few people had time or interest to hear. But Sarah's investigation was revealing facts that would completely change the dynamics of the legal battle. Bank records showed that Derek's $330,000 had not been lost through legitimate business expenses or market conditions. A significant portion of the money had been transferred to offshore accounts shortly before Premium Business Solutions declared bankruptcy. Derek's business failures were not failures at all. They were elaborate theft operations designed to convert family money into hidden personal assets while maintaining the appearance of entrepreneurial misfortune. The lawsuit against me was not about recovering legitimate damages. It was about covering up embezzlement and financial fraud, while simultaneously destroying the brother who had achieved everything Derek had pretended to accomplish. The truth was about to emerge, and Derek's carefully constructed victim narrative was going to collapse under the weight of documented evidence. But first, I had to survive the legal and personal warfare that was escalating every day, threatening not just my business and reputation, but my safety and sanity as well. Sarah Martinez proved to be worth every dollar of her considerable legal fees. Within 3 weeks of taking my case, she had assembled an investigative team that included a forensic accountant, a private investigator, and a digital evidence specialist. What they uncovered was a pattern of deception so elaborate that even I struggled to believe my own brother could have planned something so calculated and cruel. The first breakthrough came through Derek's digital communications. Court-ordered discovery required him to provide email accounts, text messages, and social media records related to his business operations and the lawsuit against me. What emerged was a detailed timeline of planning that dated back almost 2 years long, before Premium Business Solutions had even opened its doors. Derek had been recording family conversations during holiday gatherings and business discussions, collecting what he believed would be evidence of my access to confidential information about his business plans. But the recordings actually proved the opposite. They showed Derek asking me detailed questions about my client acquisition methods, pricing strategies, and service offerings, clearly seeking information he could use to compete against me. More damaging were text message conversations between Derek and our parents revealing the coordinated nature of their legal strategy. Derek had convinced Robert and Susan that I was somehow responsible for his business failures, not through direct sabotage, but through unfair advantages gained through family relationships. He had coached them on specific testimony they should provide about conversations and events that had never actually occurred. The smoking gun emerged in Derek's communications with his business partners and investors. Email threads showed him promising potential creditors that he could recover their losses by seizing assets from my business, which he claimed was partially built on stolen intellectual property and family resources. Derek had been planning to use litigation as a revenue source, threatening family members and former business associates with legal action unless they provided financial settlements. But the most shocking discovery involved Derek's offshore banking activities. The forensic accountant traced fund transfers that showed Derek had systematically embezzled money from Premium Business Solutions throughout its operation. Rather than investing in legitimate business development, Derek had been converting investor capital and family loans into personal assets hidden in accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. The $330,000 from our parents had not been lost through business incompetence. Derek had stolen it through carefully planned financial fraud, then declared bankruptcy to avoid repaying creditors, while keeping the embezzled money for his own use. The lawsuit against me was designed to deflect attention from his theft, while potentially generating additional income through settlement negotiations. Sarah's private investigator uncovered even more disturbing evidence. Derek had been attempting to manipulate my business relationships through false information campaigns designed to damage my professional reputation. He had contacted several of my clients, anonymously sending emails that claimed I was under investigation for tax fraud and that my business practices were questionable. The investigator also discovered that Derek had been trying to trademark my business name and service descriptions filing paperwork that claimed he had developed these intellectual property assets before I had used them commercially. If successful, these trademark applications would have given Derek legal grounds to force me to stop using my own business model and marketing materials. Perhaps most personally painful was learning about Derek's manipulation of our extended family and community relationships. He had been systematically contacting relatives, family friends, and business associates, spreading carefully crafted stories about my alleged betrayal and selfishness. Derek had convinced multiple people that I was responsible for our parents' financial crisis, and that my refusal to help him represented a fundamental character flaw that threatened family unity. The psychological manipulation was sophisticated and effective. Derek had positioned himself as the victim of circumstances beyond his control, while portraying me as the calculating villain who had destroyed family relationships for personal gain. People who had known me for years began questioning my motives and character based on Derek's persuasive narrative about sibling rivalry and business theft. But Derek had made one critical error that would ultimately expose his entire scheme. His attempts to coordinate multiple lawsuits against me had required him to share detailed financial information with various attorneys and potential co-plaintiffs. These communications provided a comprehensive record of his actual business activities and financial transactions, documenting the gap between his public claims about business failure and the reality of systematic embezzlement. Sarah's legal team prepared countersuits for fraud, conspiracy, defamation, and intentional interference with business relationships. We demanded full disclosure of Derek's financial records, including the offshore accounts that he had attempted to hide from creditors and family members. We also sought damages for the harm to my business reputation and the costs of defending against frivolous litigation. The most dramatic moment came when Sarah confronted Derek during his deposition testimony. Faced with documented evidence of his financial fraud and coordinated deception campaign, Derek's confident victim narrative began to unravel. Under oath, with court reporters recording every word, Derek was forced to admit that his business failures had been accompanied by the theft of investor funds and family loans. Even more damaging was Derek's testimony about his recordings of family conversations. When asked to provide the complete recordings, rather than selected excerpts, Derek was forced to reveal that most of his conversations with me had involved him seeking advice about business operations, rather than sharing proprietary information that I could use against him. The final piece of evidence that destroyed Derek's case completely was a recorded phone conversation between Derek and our parents, captured by Sarah's investigator through legal surveillance methods. In this conversation, Derek openly discussed his strategy for using litigation to recover money from me while avoiding responsibility for his embezzlement. He called our parents idiots for believing his cover stories and expressed confidence that he could manipulate the legal system to transfer my legitimate business assets to himself. Most shocking was Derek's casual discussion of destroying my marriage to Emma, suggesting that the stress of prolonged litigation would cause relationship problems that would further destabilize my life and make me more likely to agree to a settlement. Derek spoke about my personal relationships as strategic targets in his campaign to force me into financial submission. When Robert and Susan heard this recording during a family conference arranged by the attorneys, their reaction was immediate and devastating. The parents who had sued their own son to protect Derek's interests finally understood that they had been manipulated and betrayed as thoroughly as I had been. Derek's golden child status was built on lies, theft, and calculated exploitation of family loyalty. The case was about to move to trial, but Derek's position had collapsed entirely. His conspiracy was exposed, his financial crimes were documented, and his manipulation of family relationships was revealed in his own words. The question was no longer whether I could defend against his false accusations, but whether Derek would face criminal prosecution for embezzlement and fraud. Justice was approaching, but the cost of reaching this point had been enormous. My business had survived the assault on my reputation, but my family relationships were permanently altered. The trial would provide legal vindication, but emotional healing would require much more time and careful rebuilding of trust that Derek had systematically destroyed. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in February, with Judge Patricia Coleman presiding over what the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel had dubbed the most unusual family business dispute in recent Wisconsin legal history. The courtroom was packed with reporters, business community members, and family friends who had chosen sides in what had become a very public family war. Derek's attorney, James Morrison, opened with an emotional appeal that portrayed my brother as an idealistic entrepreneur whose dreams had been destroyed by a jealous sibling, willing to use any means necessary to eliminate competition. Morrison painted Derek as the victim of a systematic campaign of business sabotage, suggesting that I had leveraged family relationships and insider information to build my success on the foundation of Derek's stolen ideas. Morrison's opening statement emphasized Derek's charisma and vision, contrasting these qualities with what he characterized as my calculating and methodical approach to undermining his business opportunities. He promised to show that my business practices had been specifically designed to target Derek's client base, and that my success was directly connected to his failure. Sarah Martinez responded with an opening statement that was devastating in its simplicity and factual precision. She promised to show that Derek's business model had been based on copying my existing success, rather than innovative thinking, that his failures resulted from inexperience and poor judgment, rather than external sabotage, and that his lawsuit was designed to cover up systematic embezzlement of family funds and investor capital. Sarah's presentation focused on documented evidence, rather than emotional appeals. She methodically outlined the timeline of my business development, showing that my client relationships and service offerings had been established years before Derek's ventures had even been conceived. She promised to prove that Derek's claims about stolen intellectual property were not just false, but deliberately fabricated to support a fraudulent legal strategy. The first week of testimony established the foundation of both cases through detailed examination of business records, financial documents, and communication histories. Derek's side attempted to show that I had gained unfair advantages through family relationships, while Sarah systematically demonstrated that my success was based on education experience and independent relationship building, rather than insider information. The turning point came during Derek's cross-examination by Sarah, which lasted 2 full days and exposed every aspect of his deception. Under oath, Derek was forced to admit that his business plans had been developed after observing my success, rather than before, that his client acquisition strategies had involved targeting my existing relationships, and that his pricing models had been designed specifically to undercut my established rates. More damaging was Derek's testimony about his financial management of premium business solutions. Sarah's questions, supported by forensic accounting evidence, revealed systematic transfers of business funds to personal accounts, inflated expense reports, and payments to shell companies that Derek had created to hide embezzled money. But the most dramatic moment came when Sarah played the recorded conversation between Derek and our parents, where he had discussed his litigation strategy and expressed contempt for their intelligence and gullibility. The courtroom was silent, as Derek's voice filled the room, describing his plans to use legal action to force me into settlements while avoiding accountability for his theft of family resources. Robert and Susan, sitting in the front row behind Derek's legal team, visibly reacted to hearing their son's casual discussion of manipulating their emotions and exploiting their financial support. Susan began crying quietly as Derek's recorded voice called them fools for believing his business failure stories, while he was actually hiding stolen money in offshore accounts. Derek's attorney attempted damage control through redirect examination, suggesting that the recordings were taken out of context and that Derek's statements reflected frustration rather than criminal intent. But Sarah's presentation of supporting evidence made Derek's actual motivations unmistakable. The offshore banking records showed systematic fund transfers that corresponded exactly with Derek's business fundraising activities. Money received from family loans and investor contributions was immediately moved to accounts in Derek's name, in jurisdictions that made recovery nearly impossible. Premium Business Solutions had never been a legitimate business venture. It was an elaborate fraud scheme designed to convert other people's money into Derek's personal wealth. Sarah's forensic accountant testified that Derek had embezzled approximately $420,000 through various schemes over the 18-month period of his business operation. This amount included the $330,000 from our parents, plus additional funds from investors who had believed in Derek's fraudulent business projections. The testimony from Derek's former employees was particularly damaging. 3 of his college friends who had worked at Premium Business Solutions testified about Derek's instructions to spy on my business operations, his attempts to interfere with my client relationships, and his explicit statements about using litigation to force me out of business if direct competition failed. One former employee, Marcus Thompson, testified that Derek had instructed him to create false customer testimonials and fabricate business performance metrics for use in investor presentations and marketing materials. Marcus also revealed that Derek had asked him to apply for employment with my business to gather intelligence about my client list and service methods. The most compelling testimony came from my clients, who described their experiences with Derek's aggressive sales tactics and their relief at discovering that my business was completely separate from Premium Business Solutions. Several business owners testified about receiving misleading information from Derek's sales team and their concerns about his apparent inexperience and unprofessional behavior. Emma testified about the harassment and intimidation tactics employed by Derek throughout the lawsuit period, describing his surveillance activities and the anonymous threats we had received. Her testimony was particularly powerful because of her obvious reluctance to speak publicly about family matters and her clear distress over the situation's impact on our relationship. But perhaps the most devastating testimony came from the digital evidence specialist who had analyzed Derek's computer records and communication histories. The specialist revealed that Derek had been researching legal strategies for claiming ownership of other people's business assets months before filing his lawsuit, suggesting premeditated fraud rather than legitimate business disputes. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a complete verdict in my favor. They found Derek and my parents liable for conspiracy defamation and frivolous litigation. More significantly, they awarded damages that exceeded Derek's original claims, sending a clear message about the consequences of using the legal system to cover up criminal activity. Judge Coleman's comments during sentencing were particularly pointed. She noted that family relationships did not provide immunity from legal consequences and that Derek's abuse of legal processes to avoid accountability for his crimes warranted additional penalties beyond the jury's damage awards. The criminal referral that Judge Coleman ordered sent Derek's case to the district attorney's office for prosecution on charges of wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Sarah estimated that Derek faced potential federal prison time of 3 to 5 years with restitution requirements that would force disclosure of all hidden assets. Standing outside the courthouse after the verdict with Emma beside me and Sarah explaining our legal options for asset recovery, I felt something I had not experienced in 2 years. Peace. The truth had been revealed, justice had been served, and Derek's carefully constructed lies had been permanently exposed. But more importantly, The trial had provided something beyond legal vindication. My parents had finally seen Derek's true character. My business reputation had been restored through documented evidence, and the community understood that my success was legitimate and hard-earned rather than stolen or fraudulent. The golden child narrative that had shaped my family dynamics for 24 years was permanently shattered. Derek would face the consequences of his choices, and I would finally receive the respect and recognition that my accomplishments deserved. Justice was served, but the real work of rebuilding relationships and moving forward was just beginning. The federal sentencing hearing took place 6 months after our civil trial victory, in a courthouse that felt different from the family drama that had consumed the previous year. Derek stood before Judge Anthony Rivera, wearing an orange jumpsuit, his characteristic confidence replaced by the defeated posture of someone who finally understood the consequences of his actions. The wire fraud and money laundering convictions had been based on overwhelming evidence that Sarah's investigation had provided to federal prosecutors. Derek's offshore accounts were frozen, and their contents seized for restitution payments. His sophisticated embezzlement schemes were presented to the court as evidence of premeditated criminal activity, rather than business mistakes or family disputes. Judge Rivera sentenced Derek to 3 years and 4 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. The restitution order required Derek to pay back the full $420,000 he had embezzled plus interest and penalties that brought the total to nearly $600,000. Every asset Derek owned, including his BMW and luxury possessions, would be liquidated to begin repaying his victims. But perhaps more important than the legal consequences was watching Derek finally take responsibility for his actions. His statement to the court was the first time I had heard him acknowledge the harm he had caused to our family and his business associates. Derek admitted that his sense of entitlement and fear of failure had led him to make choices that betrayed everyone who had trusted and supported him. Robert and Susan attended every day of Derek's criminal trial, sitting in the back row and confronting the reality that their golden child was actually a sophisticated criminal who had exploited their love and support for personal gain. The parents who had sued me to protect Derek's interests were now facing their own financial ruin due to his crimes. But instead of allowing my parents to lose their home and retirement security, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. Using the success of my business and the damage awards from our civil victory, I offered to purchase their house at its fair market value and allow them to remain as tenants, paying reasonable rent. The arrangement provided them with immediate cash to address their debt problems while preserving their housing stability. This decision was not about forgiveness or family reconciliation, at least not initially. It was about demonstrating the difference between Derek's approach to family relationships and my own values. Derek had exploited our parents' resources for personal benefit. I was willing to help them, despite their role in the legal assault against me. The reaction from Robert and Susan was profound and unexpected. For the first time in my adult life, they acknowledged the fundamental injustice of how they had treated their 2 sons. Robert wrote me a letter explaining that they had confused Derek's neediness with potential and my independence with lack of need for support or recognition. Susan's apology was even more meaningful because it addressed specific actions rather than general regret. She acknowledged that their financial support of Derek's business ventures had been based on favoritism rather than sound judgment, and that their decision to sue me had been driven by panic and manipulation rather than legitimate grievances. But the real measure of change came through their actions over the following months. My parents enrolled in family counseling to address the favoritism patterns that had shaped their parenting decisions. They began attending financial planning classes to rebuild their money management skills and reduce their dependence on risky investment decisions. Most importantly, they started treating me as an adult whose judgment and expertise deserved respect rather than skepticism. Robert and Susan began referring potential clients to my business and speaking publicly about their son's integrity and professional success. Their endorsement carried weight in the business community, because everyone knew about our family's legal battle and their previous lack of support for my career. My business experienced significant growth following the trial publicity, but not for reasons I had expected. Many potential clients were attracted by the story of someone who had built success through honest work and defended it against unfair attacks. The contrast between my response to family pressure and Derek's criminal behavior became a selling point that distinguished my consultancy from competitors. Emma and I married 8 months after Derek's sentencing, in a ceremony that reflected the strength our relationship had gained through surviving the lawsuit crisis. Our wedding was attended by the clients who had become friends, the extended family members who had supported me throughout the legal battle, and Robert and Susan who participated with genuine joy rather than the obligation that had characterized their involvement in my previous achievements. The house I had bought and renovated during my early business years became our family home, expanded and improved through the financial success that followed our legal victory. Emma established her own business as a marketing consultant, building on relationships she had developed while supporting my company during its most challenging period. Derek's communication from prison consisted of letters that demonstrated genuine remorse and personal growth that I had never seen from him previously. His messages focused on accepting responsibility for his choices rather than seeking sympathy or making excuses. Derek's prison time included vocational training and counseling that addressed the entitlement and manipulation patterns that had shaped his criminal behavior. The most meaningful conversation happened during a prison visit 18 months into Derek's sentence. He explained that losing everything he had taken for granted had forced him to confront the reality that his entire adult life had been based on exploiting other people's resources and emotions. Derek acknowledged that he had been prepared to destroy my life to avoid facing his own failures and mistakes. But Derek also expressed something that surprised me: respect for the way I had handled our family crisis. He admitted that my decision to help our parents despite their lawsuit against me had demonstrated a character and integrity that he was only beginning to understand and develop himself. The extended family relationships that Derek's manipulations had damaged were slowly rebuilt through honest conversations and demonstrated changes in behavior. Relatives, who had initially believed Derek's version of our conflict, began reaching out to acknowledge their misjudgments and express support for my business and marriage. 3 years after the lawsuit was filed, my business had grown to employ 4 consultants and serve more than 60 clients throughout southeastern Wisconsin. The financial planning and business development services we provided had evolved beyond my original bookkeeping focus, offering comprehensive support for small business growth and sustainability. Robert and Susan had become valuable informal advisors to my business, sharing their accounting expertise and professional relationships in ways that benefited my clients. The parents who had once dismissed my potential were now proud advocates for my success and integrity. Derek's scheduled release from federal prison was still 6 months away, but his letters suggested genuine transformation and commitment to rebuilding his life through honest work rather than shortcuts and manipulation. His restitution payments would continue for years, but he had expressed determination to fulfill his legal obligations completely. The most profound lesson from our family's crisis was understanding that love sometimes requires boundaries and consequences rather than enablement and protection. Derek's criminal behavior had been encouraged by decades of family support that shielded him from the natural results of his poor choices. My willingness to fight his lawsuit, rather than settle quietly, had forced everyone in our family to confront uncomfortable truths about favoritism, entitlement, and the difference between supporting someone and enabling their destructive behavior. The legal battle that was designed to destroy me had ultimately saved Derek by forcing him to face reality and begin genuine change. Standing in my office 5 years after receiving those first legal papers, surrounded by evidence of a successful business built through honest work and maintained through ethical practices, I understood something important about justice and family relationships. Real love requires holding people accountable for their actions, while remaining open to redemption and growth when change is genuine and sustained. Derek's prison sentence was ending soon, and he would face the challenge of rebuilding his life with a criminal record and substantial debt obligations. But for the first time in our relationship, I believed he possessed the honesty and humility necessary to succeed through legitimate efforts, rather than exploitation and manipulation. The family business war that had nearly destroyed all of us had ultimately taught everyone involved the difference between success based on character and success based on advantages. True achievement requires integrity, perseverance, and the courage to stand up for what is right, even when the costs are significant and the opponents are people you love. My parents had learned that favoritism damages both children, not just the one who receives less support. Derek had learned that entitlement and shortcuts lead to criminal behavior and personal destruction. And I had learned that defending your principles and achievements sometimes requires fighting people you care about in order to preserve the possibility of genuine relationships based on truth and respect. As I write this story today, I want to ask you something that goes to the heart of family relationships and personal integrity. Have you ever been in a situation where standing up for yourself meant confronting family members who were enabling destructive behavior? How do you balance loyalty to family with the need to protect your own achievements and values? I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below, because stories like these remind us that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's lies and manipulation. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others find it. Subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about overcoming family conflicts and business challenges, and share it with anyone who might be facing similar situations. Your support helps me continue telling stories that matter and connecting with people who understand that justice and family healing are both possible when we have the courage to stand up for truth. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of a community that believes integrity and hard work still matter. I hope your own family relationships are built on honesty and mutual respect, and I wish you success in all your endeavors, whether they involve business family or the courage to do what is right even when it is difficult.